Now, at this point, this application doesn't look too bad. I mean, it is quite some code, but it works the way it should. But of course, there's one thing that doesn't really work the way it should. At the moment, this application always ends after we chose one action, and that's not how it should work. Instead, it should keep on going. And we can achieve this by using another control structure offered by Go. We can add a loop to our code, so that some code is executed over and over again until a certain condition is met or something like this. And we can achieve this by using the for keyword. This creates a loop. And unlike in other programming languages, this is also the only kind of loop you can create in Go. In other languages, you might have a while loop or something like this. Here you just have for. But for in Go is pretty flexible, as you'll also see throughout this course. You can, for example, use for to then define a helper variable that will only use for that loop, typically named I, which starts at some value, typically an integer with a starting value of 0. Then you add a semicolon, not a comma, but a semicolon, and a condition. A condition that, as long as it's met, keeps that loop running. For example, that I should be smaller than 2, let's say. And then you add another semicolon, and then some code that should be executed after every loop iteration. For example, that I should be incremented, which you can do with that shortcut. It's the same as saying I plus 1. This is just a shorter version. So this will add 1 to I after every loop iteration. And then, just as with a function or an if statement, you add curly braces to define the for loop body. So now the code inside of these curly braces will be executed twice in this case. So as long as I is smaller than 2, which is the case for exactly 2 iterations, since we start at 0 and then add 1 to it after every iteration. And we could now grab all that code here, so all the if-else blocks and this initial output, and move that here into this for loop. So that this is nested inside the for loop, and therefore our main function now basically consists of only that for loop that contains all this code. And therefore this code will now be executed twice, which is not the final result I want, but better than what we had before. Because now with that change made, we can run this application again, and we get that output we saw before, and we can, for example, check our balance. But now, unlike before, the application then does not stop, but instead we get this output again. And we can now choose to deposit money, for example, and deposit 100. And then it ends, because now we had 2 iterations. But as you see, that's how we can keep our application running, or how we can keep that code running. Now, of course, we want to keep it running for longer here. And therefore, of course, we could choose a very high value for I here in the condition. Now it would keep on running for 200 iterations. That might be enough for this dummy demo app here, but it's of course not what you would want if this would be a more realistic app. You don't want to limit the user to 200 executions. Instead, what you would want would be an infinite loop. And that's what we'll work on in the next lecture.